And I'm David Fujimoto, also co-chair of Alice. Good evening, everyone.
We have a lot to get to tonight, but before we get started, I just want to take a quick second and be sure to thank the African American Arts and Culture Complex for being such gracious hosts. In particular, Ms. Precious Green over there, if you want to get a... Precious has been such a delight to work with, so I'm so appreciative of her help. And as Reverend Townsend mentioned, there's a lot of really beautiful art here in the complex, but I could just take a quick second and ask to bring your attention to the exhibit that's displayed here on the walls here of the Hall of Culture. It's called Smoke and Mirrors, the War on Drugs. And it's about the experiences of men and women of color in the war on drugs and the evolving cannabis policies over the years. And there's really some powerful stuff here. So I encourage you to, after the debate, some other time before the exhibit closes in August, to come back and take a look. And I think that's about it. I think we should get to work. We are very happy to have the candidates here on stage tonight. We have Dean Preston. And Supervisor Vallie Brown. And moderating the debate tonight is my better half, David Fujimoto, so I'm just going to go ahead and pass this on to him.
I didn't get the applause that the candidates got. I just don't get it. I am thrilled to be moderating this very important debate here tonight. Alice has members throughout District 5, and the topics that we'll be discussing tonight are of great importance not only to the residents of this district, but to the city as a whole. And so we're very happy to have you here tonight. And to be clear, Alice has not yet endorsed in this race. Our board will be making recommendations in August, and the membership, many of you here tonight, will be voting on those recommendations for our final endorsement. If you have any questions about your membership status, please check in with Iowena in the back at the table. Many of you signed in to get into the building tonight. That does not count as signing in for the purpose of showing up to this event for our purposes at Alice in terms of voting eligibility. So if you want to make sure that you are eligible to vote for our endorsement vote in August, please check in with Iowena at some point, hopefully after the debate. We're going to get started here. I'm going to cover some quick ground rules and explain the format, and then we're going to get started. In the interest of time and to make sure everyone up here can be heard, we ask that you please limit your reactions to snapping or twinkling your fingers, or giving a thumbs up if you agree or support, and if you disagree, a thumbs down, but applause and oral sounds and such really limits the amount of time for the candidates. And to the candidates, we look forward to a very spirited but of course respectful debate about these important issues facing our city. We are going to begin with opening statements, and then we will move to the question and answer portion of the debate. The questions are going to cover the topics of housing, homelessness, transportation, as well as quality of life and public safety issues. One candidate will be asked a direct question and has 2 minutes to respond. The other two candidates can then spend 1 minute each responding to that first answer or giving their own answer to the question. At the end of the questioning, each candidate will have 2 minutes for closing statements. We are going to begin with opening statements. Supervisor Vallie Brown, we will begin with you. Please give your opening statement.
Thank you, everyone, and hello, D5. Cut down on my time. So, I'm Vallie Brown. I'm the supervisor of District 5, and I just have to say, I love this district. This district is the heart of San Francisco. And before I was a legislative aide and then supervisor, I was a neighborhood activist for over 2 decades. I was also an artist, and I also taught art in Hunters Point to children. The one thing, there's a couple things that I learned when I was a neighborhood activist: to listen to people and never accept no. As a neighborhood activist and legislative aide, I did things with my neighbors, like start a neighborhood association in Lower Haight. We fought violence that was plaguing the district through all the neighborhoods and really looking at the root causes. We planted trees. We actually fought 5-5 Laguna to make sure they had affordable housing for our LGBT folks. We also did other things in the neighborhood. And what I did as legislative aide, many things since I was a legislative aide for so many years. San Francisco Clean Power, I started it and then I passed it. Plastic bag ban. Neighborhood preference. It's where people can actually get into housing that is built in their neighborhood. I did the first parklet in the district. I actually did worked with the neighbors to do the farmers markets. I also did a opportunity site for building housing on private and public land. That's how we got the McDonald's in the Haight-Ashbury that's going to build 100% affordable. I also pushed with my colleagues $40 million to put in the small sites program so we can actually buy buildings that are in jeopardy of Ellis Act. And actually, we're in closing right now in the Haight-Ashbury for our first building. I mean, I really bring a different perspective on the Board of Supervisors that I think is needed. I grew up in Utah. I grew up in poverty. My father died when I was a year old, and my mother, she tried to make ends meet. The problem was we had housing insecurity. I never knew that. We moved often. We were just before we were evicted. And the thing I learned about that is you have to fight for housing. My mother also died because we didn't have health care. So this has absolutely gave me a perspective that when we should have housing rights, health care rights, something that we should be fighting for in this city. And as your supervisor, I'm already fighting for that with building housing and affordable housing. I want to make sure that we have reasonable solutions for reasonable results. I really feel that's my number one position as your supervisor. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. Ryan Solomon, you are next. Please give your opening statement.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you guys for having me here today, especially thanks to the Alice Co-Chair Society. You guys are great, and you've been around forever, and I'm very grateful to have this invite. A little bit about me. As you heard, my name's Ryan Solomon. I've lived in District 5 for over 15 years, and if anyone's been here at least as long as I have, you've seen the city and our district go through ups and downs, things changing, things being better, things maybe not quite as good. But I'm here to make sure that our community stays safe and sound and everyone is protected and feels safe. And I can tell you directly that I'm here because of an unfortunate, unsafe environment around certain areas. I was unfortunately attacked by a mentally unwell person. I was put in life-threatening condition, was in the hospital for a little over a week and recovering for a little over 2 months. What happened to me, we can get into grisly details later, what happened to me should not ever be allowed to happen to anyone else, and it is our duty as community members and as city supervisors and the city itself to make sure that all of our citizens are safe and cared for. So with that said, that's why I'm running. I'll tell you a little bit more. I'm an openly gay man that's worked in the service industry for all of my life. I'm a working class man. I work a full-time job to pay rent, like probably all of you here. Not all, but most. You know, we're all working class people that don't own property and need to pay our rent. And we need to make sure that rent control stays intact as well as expanded so that we don't have the risk of suddenly having our rent raised outside of our control that we can no longer afford. So I'm here to try to support you, to try to support us, to protect us and our community from any harm and for everyone to be safe and sound where we live. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Dean Preston, please give your opening statement.
Thanks. I'm going to stand since we have such an energetic crowd. Hey everyone, I'm Dean Preston. Thanks to our hosts and to all of you for being here today. I'm running for supervisor because the status quo in City Hall is just not working. We have the least affordable city in the entire country and staggering inequality. Now, I've never been a City Hall insider. I'm a civil rights and tenant rights attorney. I founded California's only statewide tenant rights group that helped lead the fight to save rent control when it was under attack. And for over 20 years, I've been on the front lines fighting for tenants, for neighbors, and for working people. I also have deep roots here in District 5. I've lived in the district over 20 years. I've been a renter here and a homeowner. I helped lead my local neighborhood association. I'm a former small business owner. I'm also a grateful husband and father, and my kids are sixth generation. My two daughters are sixth generation San Franciscans. And they both go to public school here in the district. So I believe now is the time for us to take bigger, bolder, and more courageous steps. I'm really inspired by new leaders like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York. And like her, I'm a democratic socialist who believes that everyone has a fundamental right to an affordable home, to health care, a living wage, and equal access to power. Now, I have already helped San Francisco take some big steps. I wrote and we passed Proposition F, which gives every tenant in San Francisco a right to an attorney if they face eviction. And 85% of the people who face eviction in San Francisco are low income. Proposition F will do more than anything this city has done in a generation to stop evictions. We also took a big step forward with Proposition C, which taxes our biggest corporations to tackle homelessness in a meaningful way. And I'm proud that before a lot of folks even knew there was Prop C, I was organizing volunteers who went to every door in this district to spread the message about Proposition C. But unfortunately, Prop C is also an example of the failure of City Hall. Our own mayor opposed Prop C, and now the measure is tied up in court. My campaign is about taking bold steps. Some may call them radical, and I welcome that. We need a Green New Deal for San Francisco, a public bank to reinvest in our community, and we need social housing to reverse displacement. And here in District 5, we need to save Midtown. We need to prioritize affordable housing, not just luxury condominiums. And we need to finally get a navigation center in this district. We cannot afford the status quo. We need to rethink what's possible here in San Francisco. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. We are now going to move on to the question and answer portion of the debate. The first topic that we are going to address, of course, is housing. Affordability and displacement, of course, as we've all heard, just came up a couple of times, at least in the opening remarks by the candidates. Supervisor Brown, we're going to start with you. The Planning Department concluded in last year's Housing Needs and Trends report that the city continues to experience outmigration of African Americans and Latinos. What can you do to not only stop that outmigration, but create the conditions necessary so that African Americans and Latinos can and will want to return to San Francisco?
Well, one of the things we have to do is we have to stop the bleeding that's happening right now of people being pushed out of the city. And one of the first things that I did when I was supervisor is I took legislation for Divisadero for affordable housing, apartments. I went out into the community and I said, we need to make this happen. And I actually legislated and got the highest percentage of affordable housing in the city on Divisadero for 3 projects. And so instead of a gas station, instead of an old radiator shop or a car garage, we're going to have affordable housing. And when I talked about neighborhood preference, what neighborhood preference does is it actually lets people that live in the neighborhood apply for affordable housing, and they have a much better chance, a 40% better chance of getting that housing. We have to keep people in the neighborhoods that they love, and they've woven their fabric of their lives in this the neighborhoods. I think with our African American community and our Latinx community, this is something that we need to do. I also funded a group to actually start getting people into affordable housing. You cannot believe how many people are not even in affordable housing. And one of the things with affordable housing, you have to make $46,500 a year. I also funded to put workforce so people can actually make that money to qualify for affordable housing. There's many different steps we need to do, and I've been doing them in my 8 months as I've been supervisor. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. Ryan Solomon, what is your response?
I completely agree with Vallie on everything she said, and it was very smart and well put. Sorry. But this, I can also tie it back to something we had on our last state bill, Costa-Hawkins, and how we were trying to repeal that. Unfortunately, it did not pass, which would basically, if anyone's unfamiliar, it's the law that only applies rent control to buildings built before 1979. So any new buildings are not under rent control. Any buildings being built in the Mission District, which would be, we consider gentrification, would benefit heavily if we were to get rid of Costa-Hawkins, because then we can just raise rent just astronomically out of anywhere and help people not become displaced. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. And Dean Preston, what is your response?
Thank you. The displacement crisis, which has disproportionately hit African American, Latino, and other people of color in San Francisco, is absolutely tragic, and I think it's important to understand, it's by design. Okay, this is not an accident, and people in this room know this, right? We have a housing system, an economic system that preys upon people of color in this city. I have been standing up to the real estate industry for the last 20 years in San Francisco and in Sacramento. These evictions will continue if the people in power are picked by the landlord lobbyists and the real estate speculators who, make no mistake about it, are profiting off of this displacement. So we need to get serious not only about stopping displacement, like we're doing with Proposition F, in New York, where they did a right to counsel, like we passed last year, evictions dropped in half in the zip codes that have the right to counsel. I'm very proud to have authored that legislation here.
Thank you, Dean. Switching to a slightly different topic, the city, when it purchased the former McDonald's site at 730 Stanton Street to develop into affordable housing, according to the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, the pre-development phase could last 3 to 5 years before construction actually begins, and it's currently sitting as a vacant parking lot. Ryan, we're going to start with you. As supervisor, what will you do to ensure that city-owned sites that are required and slated to be developed later, like the McDonald's site, don't sit idle as blight in the neighborhood?
We discussed this quite a bit at the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Community Meeting, and what some proposed plans were for that is that it becomes basically a youth center, somewhere where youth can gather and perform activities, stay out of trouble, things along those lines. But that would be great temporary use for that sort of facility where development may take years before anything even gets started. But I think the better solution for that would be to make this just not take so long. Bills take so long to get through City Hall. You have to go through so many different departments. There's 3 different departments just for demolition alone. And you have to get approval from all of them, and they all have different definition of exactly what demolition is. So while we can use the property to help youth in the meantime, we should more focus on streamlining the ability to actually get things built. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Dean, you have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. Well, so the vacant issue, there are the city-owned lots, and then there's also a broader vacancy issue plaguing the district, particularly in the Haight and here along Fillmore Street, where over 15 African-American-owned businesses have closed in the last, just in the last few years. So we need to activate all these spaces. So for the private businesses, we need to look at a vacancy tax to force commercial landlords to rent them out. And for the sites that you're inquiring more specifically about, we need to activate those as well. The Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council has a very, I think, nuanced and very positive proposal for the McDonald's site that I hope is adopted and executed. I'd also like to see that, so in some of the other city-owned vacant sites, we should be looking at their perfect sites for navigation centers, which again, we desperately need one. We've been promised one for years in District 5 and still don't have one, so we could use those sites for that. We also could use, these sites ultimately should be social housing, and we shouldn't just be rezoning them, we should be funding social housing on these sites.
Thank you, Dean. Supervisor Brown, you also have 1 minute to respond.
Yes, well, actually, I was the one that found McDonald's for the city to buy when I was doing housing opportunities, and I think that's really important, is really looking for these housing opportunities in this land. Right now, it's in an RFP. I think there's a couple of different proposals of how to use that property. But this is the thing, and one of the things the mayor has brought forward is a housing bond, a $500 million housing bond. And I support it because that's one way we can get these properties built. In District 5, we have now with McDonald's 5 sites that are for 100% affordable, and we don't have the money to build them. And so we have to do things that changes that. We have to have the money to build housing. I am looking at other opportunity sites. There's also underutilized sites in this district to build housing. This is something that we need to do. Getting affordable housing is very important, and it's one of my priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. I just want to, as a reminder to the audience, I think everybody's been pretty good so far, but as a reminder, please keep it to just the snaps and the twinkling fingers. This next question is for Dean. You were quoted by Salon just last week that you want to see more land banking, or the acquisition of land where affordable housing can be built. Are there sites either in the district or outside the district that you would like to see the city acquire for the purpose of developing affordable housing?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, and so land banking is basically the idea of buying up the land. And whenever you propose that, people always say, well, it's too expensive. But imagine for a minute if 10, 20, 30 years ago, when many people were starting to talk about land banking, if we had bought up those properties, how much affordable and social housing we could be building today. On the question of sites, there are absolutely sites. My view is any vacant lot, whether it's privately owned or publicly owned right now, the city should be looking at to acquire for future housing. So that includes parking lots. It also includes city-owned sites. I mean, right near here, I'd love to see housing right next to where the police have a big parking lot. Let's put their parking lot underground and let's build social housing that working class people can live in above it. DMV lot, one of the biggest available lots in the city. We should absolutely be building housing on that site. But those are the big ones. There are also smaller lots that we could go after and just buy and begin building housing on those sites. I want to say something about, we're not going to solve our affordable housing crisis and our affordability crisis by taking the crumbs that developers give us when they build multi-million-dollar condos for people to acquire and hold and have those sit empty. And that's the city's basic policy. That's the priority of this city right now, is generating money. City Hall generates money by making sure that condo developers are happy, right? So even the affordable housing bond, like a $500 million, that sounds like a lot of money. Sounds like a lot of money to me. Why do we not have $1 billion bond? Like the level of crisis right now, we could be building twice the housing if we doubled the size of the bond. And the voters in San Francisco, and I think many of you want that. That's what we showed last year with Prop C. They want ambitious solutions to these problems, not just the crumbs that developers give us. Thank you.
Supervisor Brown, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, like I said, I've already done the research and have gotten the different sites, and we actually bought one site. There's underutilized sites. Why don't we do 1 billion? I would love to do 1 billion also, but we have to start because we need 2/3 of the voters. And just like Prop C, I supported Prop C, but I am worried that if we do go big, we'll get nothing. We can always do another bond. I just want to start something now. The way it goes in this city is we need to move, and we need to move fast. I put $1,600,000 in the McDonald's site to get pre-development. So when we do have this money, we can go right away and build it. We have to move faster. We have to move smarter. This is not the time to be scared of these things, and that's what I'm doing as supervisor.
Ryan, you have 1 minute to respond.
Prop C, I think, was a great prop without great definition. It allocated roughly about $300 million to homelessness in very vague areas: mental health care, housing and development, and education. But it forgot the third one. It is not refined in any way. So let's say 25% of this money, of this $300 million, is going to mental health care for homeless people. It does not address in any way in how that's being spent. It doesn't say if it's giving them mental health care. It doesn't say if it's helping them with addiction crisis. The reason why this bill is unfortunately stuck is because of that lack of definition with what we were going to do with money. And that can be traced down to, well, it's stopped because of it got 61% of the vote and didn't get 66%. It didn't get 66% because people didn't know where it was going.
Thank you, Ryan. One issue as it relates to preventing housing from getting built can be the cost of construction. Non-profit developers struggle to be able to pay construction workers what for-profit developers can, and for-profit companies struggle to keep up with what tech companies can pay. With that in mind, how would you address this problem of bringing down the cost of construction while at the same time ensuring that construction workers earn living wages and benefits? Oh, I'm sorry. We will start this one with Supervisor Brown.
Well, it's a really tough situation. I mean, one of the things that I did before I became supervisor, I was actually looking at how do we build housing, and how do we build affordable housing, and how do we build it in the cheapest way possible. But we also are a labor town, and we have to protect labor. And so, do we give up our, our strength in labor and the working class people so we can have housing, cheaper housing? No. I think what we need to do is raise more money for housing. And that's one of the reasons I'm looking at this bond and other things, so we can raise money for housing. Right now, with the tariffs going on and what we face, it's really tough. I mean, it has gone up like almost 15% construction in the last year. That's outrageous. So we have got to do better, but I am not going to throw labor under the table so we can get a few extra housing.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. Ryan, you have 1 minute to respond.
I agree with Vallie completely on that one. I also think that we should talk with other cities. Our mayors and our supervisors should be talking with other cities that are bringing in jobs. So we should be talking with San Jose about developing more housing there so that people aren't, forced to come here and make our rents and our construction costs outrageous. We should be working with them so that they can actually live near where they work. People hate traveling, 1 to 2 hours just to get to their job. So if we can also work on top of what Vallie said to get other cities to help them also develop their own affordable housing, we'd be able to help our city's problems with that.
Dean Preston, you have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. And I've spent 20 years, as I mentioned, fighting for affordable housing and for tenant rights. There's always the pressure to pit folks against each other, and we have always rejected that. Whether it's when fighting for affordable housing money in the Capitol, we have always said that of course, we are going to fight for workers. And I also, we're not going to compromise at all on labor standards or pay in order to bring down construction costs. But let's also realize people are pretty quick to go right at labor on the costs. There are a lot of costs that drive up the cost of construction, right? That finance the banks. Let's point the finger at the banks and the cost of capital, right? Let's look at the cost of materials. There's a lot of things that go into how much a project costs. One last thing I want to say on this that's really important. When we talk about a bond, right now the way our city law is set up, bonds get passed through to tenants. So when we talk about these big ideas on how much we're going to spend and raise with bonds, the Board of Supervisors, City Hall needs to take action to bar pass-throughs to tenants so tenants don't end up paying the bill for affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, candidates. We are going to now shift over, for the time being, to the issue of homelessness. Dean, we're going to start with you. On your website, you have committed to implementing a whole new approach to housing and homelessness. Can you explain this new approach and how you will make that a reality in the context of homelessness?
Thank you for the question. Thank you, David, for reviewing the salon.com article and our website, votedean.com. I appreciate it. Thorough research. Our approach to homelessness in San Francisco was recently characterized by the UN as cruel and inhuman. That's where we are right now. So what are we going to do about that? We took a huge step forward with Proposition C. Proposition C raising over $300 million a year, right? And we had to fight for that. And I think we need to hold folks in City Hall responsible for the fact that that ballot measure did not get the 2/3 that it needed. It passed, but it didn't get the 2/3 it needed that would have made it bulletproof from legal challenge. So the mayor, Senator Scott Wiener, and others who opposed this measure, and who frankly are not backing me in this race, okay? And they bear a lot of responsibility for this. If I were supervisor, I'd be leading an effort to go back to the ballot right now. So when you were voting on this race for D5, you'd also be voting again on Prop C. So we could get from 62% up to 66%, and stop complaining about the fact that we don't have money and force the biggest corporations in this city to pay their fair share to solve this problem. So we took a big step. It's not the only thing we can do. We can certainly expand navigation centers. I support Supervisor Haney's legislation to require navigation centers in every district.
Dean, if I may, navigation centers is something that's been happening. Prop C was passed through a ballot initiative last year. What's the new approach? What are the new things that you're going to do on this particular issue?
Sure. When the Prop C money flows, and if we can't get it from Prop C, the IPO tax, we can get it through that. There's also going to be another round of ERAF money coming through, right? So I don't want to hear that there isn't the money, but to your question, Prop C was a vision of how we handle these things, right? And that includes getting serious about mental health treatment. It includes getting serious about substance abuse treatment. So innovative ideas, I can talk your ear off about them, but I mean, for example, we have a jail. People are organizing to close the jail. Let's make it a mental health facility.
Thank you, Dean. Supervisor Brown, you have 1 minute, and just kind of to reframe it, what sort of innovative approaches to homelessness are you taking and will you be taking moving forward if you're elected supervisor?
Well, I've already done that as supervisor. I actually passed the first vehicular navigation center legislation unanimously, and that actually really helps because I'm looking at ways that we can handle homelessness and deal with homelessness upstream. When people are in a vehicle, whether that is a car or an RV, a broken down RV, it's a very thin veil to homelessness. And so with this navigation center, people can go get services and a pipeline. And as far as the navigation center, I'm looking for a navigation center in Haight-Ashbury. We need one. But not only do we need a navigation for the transitional age youth, We need pipelines for these navigation centers. I'm not willing to just warehouse people, especially the transitional age youth. There needs to be pipelines that they can go in and get housing, job, and education. We have to put that in the budget. And that's one of the things we did with ERAP when I was the Board of Supervisors. We pushed money into these kinds of programs to fund homeless because we know it is so important and we have a crisis.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. Ryan, you have 1 minute to respond.
The unique approach that I would have is I would like to actually start this first city-funded mental health care facility that offers both in and outpatient care. We have several throughout the country that offer outpatient care for guidance and counseling and substance abuse. But I would like to start a city-funded mental health care facility that allows people to come for treatment and stay for treatment if they want or if required by law. This would allow people, everyday people, to walk in and get treatment for anything that they had due to stress, anxiety, depression. It would also help people on the streets that are struggling with addiction abuse or mental stability issues or even just job training. So that would be my unique perspective on that.
Thank you, Ryan. Ryan, we're gonna stay with you for the next one. Navigation centers, of course, has been brought up here tonight. It's been a hot topic across the city. However, right now, only 15% of people who are in navigation centers are placed into permanent housing when they leave navigation centers, and more than a third are dispatched outside of the city through the Homeward Bound program. With those numbers being what they are, do you consider navigation centers to be an effective way to address homelessness? Why or why not? And how would you improve them?
They are definitely very, very helpful for the society, for the communities that they are placed in, helping people get off the streets. Unfortunately, sometimes it's only temporary, but at least it's helping them get in take a step in the right direction into trying to improve their quality of life, trying to find them the right homes, trying to find them good jobs, just trying to help them not have to live on the streets. The numbers I read, unfortunately, were differently from what you presented. I read that it was about 68% people being put into homes, but that was from a 2017 report. So I didn't know the numbers were quite that low, unfortunately. I was actually very happy about the 68% numbers. So with that, I would try to improve it by us, with the work of the supervisors and the mayor, to have more affordable to very low income housing, so that we can give them job assistance and then they can be able to afford in these very low income housing units that we can build in new development.
Thank you, Ryan. Dean, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, I think that navigation centers are extremely important. We desperately need one in District 5. Are they the permanent solution for folks in terms of permanent supportive housing? Of course not. But let's not ignore the tremendous importance and value of people having a safe place and being off the street, not being traumatized by being homeless and made worse in whatever condition they're in. And navigation centers play a very important role in doing just that. To me, navigation centers are like the opposite of the sweeps. You know, the fact that our city continues to engage in homeless sweeps and criminalize homeless people is unconscionable, and we should be getting all those folks off the streets and into navigation centers. But ultimately, the solution is large amounts of affordable supportive housing and social housing. We need to we need to think bigger about social housing. One last thing, in Vienna, 60% of the housing is owned by the city. It's municipal housing, right? That's how you solve a homelessness crisis in this city.
Supervisor Brown, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I would love to be able to fund all of the housing and socialized housing. And if we have this conversation, we probably should have it a national conversation, state conversation. Because this is something that we would all, especially the wealthy, would actually have to come and put 50% at least of your income and your wealth into this kind of funding. And I'm willing to do that. I think it's something that's really smart. But We have to look at what do we have now, what can we do, and I'm pushing that through right now. I've been working on legislation for that, and I will continue as your supervisor.
It's nice to have a direct response. I understand when candidates were challenged on something, I think motioning.
I have reserved the discretion to allow that, so go ahead. And
Great.
Thank you. There's another response that's warranted.
When you make a comment about wealthy and point in my direction, I do need to respond. And let me say that both the appointed incumbent and I live comfortably in homes that we both own in the district. So if you're looking for the candidate who's struggling to pay rent, he's sitting probably between the incumbent supervisor and myself. But I believe very strongly that the people in this room and the people in this district care about their homes much more than they care about my home or your home. Thank you.
Supervisor Brown, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I just want to say I'm not sure how Mr. Preston knows my financial wealth. Yes, I have a condo, but do I live paycheck to paycheck? Absolutely. And I bet you a lot of people out here that have places live paycheck to paycheck too. I do. I mean, that is the way it is. And I think that, you know, when you live in a place and it's your home. No, I am not a trust fund. I'm not a trust fund. I never have been. I think you're talking about my opponent here. But I am not a trust fund.
Audience, we're going to take a second here. Audience, as a reminder, we are not going to be able to proceed with the debate. I don't think anyone here has come to the debate to listen to the audience boo and cheer. So remember, please use the hand signals. And we will move forward. Vallie, you have 10 seconds to finalize that last thought.
Name calling.
I'm not name calling. I'm just talking about the facts. And so if you're going to sit and we're going to have this really difficult conversation and talk about socialized housing, let's really talk about it and who's going to pay for it. I'm willing to pay half of everything that I have. Are you? Are you? Are you? That's me.
All right, we are going to move on to the next question. Sticking to the issue of navigation centers, there was a strong community reaction, both in support and opposition, to the recently proposed navigation center at the seawall lot. While it was ultimately approved by the Port Commission, it was a time-consuming and stressful situation for all involved. Supervisor Brown, we're going to start with you. Can you right now commit to a site for a navigation center in the district? And if so, what would you say to the neighbors who may fight just as hard as the neighbors did against the waterfront navigation center?
Well, I actually signed on to Matt Haney's legislation right away because even when I was a legislative aide, I was actually looking for a navigation center in Haight-Ashbury years ago, really struggling to find a site that's suitable. And one of the things that when I came forward and I said, I'm looking for a navigation center, I've already been starting to talk to my neighbors about the navigation center. I'm talking to the boards in that neighborhood to talk about what we want to see and what we think the best site would be. I mean, you have to understand that I think, and because I was a neighborhood activist, I'm not going to do anything without talking to the neighborhood. I never do anything without discussion in the neighborhood. And we've been having those discussions. It's a hard discussion, but we've been having those discussions.
I'm going to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on that. We certainly appreciate that you supported the navigation center on the waterfront site, but and you mentioned talking with your neighbors about a potential site. What are you going to say to neighbors who are going to raise concerns of safety, of drug abuse? These are all the things that neighbors rose at the waterfront in the context of the waterfront navigation center. What are you going to say to these neighbors who oppose it?
Well, what I have said is that we're in a crisis. And because we're looking at the transitional age youth in Haight-Ashbury, this particular population is really complicated. That population, it's almost It's over a half a century old problem in the Haight-Ashbury. And they're young. And we need to make sure that when they go into Navigation Center that they're treated well and they have the right services. I supported the Navigation Center at the seawall, and I support navigation centers all over. I actually did legislation so we could have a vehicular navigation center. And my neighbors, look, we've done a lot of tough stuff together. Remember the violence that we were struggling with and we were combating in this neighborhood and all these neighborhoods? We had to have some tough discussions to be able to combat the violence. And that's exactly what's happening here. This is a crisis, and we have to work with our neighbors to get this done.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. As a brief reminder to everybody, we might not have actually said it in the beginning. So for the first time, I'll say, please, for all of you who are against the wall, please make sure you're not leaning on any of the art or the murals. The center would very much appreciate that. So thank you. Ryan, you're going to have a minute to respond, and just to refresh your memory here, can you commit to a navigation center in the district, and what will you say to neighbors who come out against it?
No matter what neighborhood we're going to be working with to get navigation centers in, wherever it's going to be near, there's going to be opposition. And what I would tell them is that this is actually going to be better for it to be focused and with help rather than just be allowed to be on the streets, being wherever it is. It could be near a school, it could be near a park, people could be doing drugs and leaving needles behind. But if we have a navigation center, which does not, so we're clear, does not allow drugs on property, it would be safer, far, far, far safer for our community and for any hazardous areas like schools or children or playgrounds. I said I would just push so hard that the navigation center is going to rather clean up the neighborhood than make it more disastrous.
Thank you, Ryan. Dean Preston, you have 1 minute to respond.
I also support the Seawall Navigation Center. And I have a slightly different take, and I don't want to upset some of my folks in other districts, but I'm not so sure there would be strong opposition to a navigation center in District 5. I've held about 40 to 50 community meetings, and we've talked about these issues over the last few years. Everyone I talk to wants a navigation center in District 5. It was promised by our last supervisor, it's been promised by this supervisor, and I think District 5, at the risk of being a little presumptuous about it, is a little different. This is a progressive, compassionate district. Will there be a voice or two that oppose a navigation center? Probably, but I don't think you're going to see a groundswell of opposition. When Supervisor Ronan took over in District 9, she prioritized getting a navigation center in the mission. She did it. She started steps immediately to do it and had it done within her first year in office. This is a high priority for me if I'm to become your supervisor.
Supervisor Brown, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Yes, and then Supervisor Ronan took her a year, and I've been in office for 8 months. So give me a few months and we'll see where it goes. This is a priority for me. I mean, I've been talking about it for years, Dean. Before Prop C, before any of that, I've been talking about this navigation center. I have to find the right place for it, and we're in discussions, the neighborhood, we're all in discussions about it, so.
If I could respond.
30 seconds.
Yeah. So I think there's a difference between talking about something and doing something. And I think it's not to say it's easy, but at a certain point, the site needs to be identified and announced, right? The neighbors need to be talked to, the community meetings need to happen, and we need to move forward. I have not seen any of that happen under the appointed incumbent or her predecessor.
Supervisor Brown, you have 30 seconds.
I just said I was doing this. I don't know where I am right now. Just exactly was that I said what I'm doing, and I'm moving forward, and we'll have a navigation center. We know that.
All right, we are going to now move on to a different topic. Before we do that, I just want to remind everyone who is an Alice member, if you haven't signed in at the table in the back, this room is packed right now. But if you haven't signed in or signed in the back, please do so at some point tonight to make sure that you get credit for your attendance, which will go towards your voting eligibility in the August endorsement vote that will include endorsements for races, including this one that we're here for tonight. If you are not a member of Alice, now is a great time to become a member. You can also sign up in the back table. These are the kinds of events that we put on. We have membership meetings every second Monday of the month where we have panel discussions and other events, and so it's a great way to get involved and find out what's happening in the community. So with that, we are going to move on to the next topic of transportation. Supervisor Brown, we're going to start with you. To put it nicely, Muni has struggled enough that we are all well acquainted with the term Muni meltdown. Although Ed Reskin's contract is not being renewed, he is staying through August, and then it's anyone's guess as to how long it will take to find a new director. In the meantime, Julie Kirschbaum, the director of transit, who has overseen some of the worst Muni meltdowns of this last year, was just promoted. Clearly, Reskin's departure is not a silver bullet, but what else can and should be done by this Board of Supervisors to improve transit for residents now while a new director is being found?
Well, I think the proper term is it sucks. Muni sucks, I agree. And the first 2 weeks I was in office, I noticed that I couldn't get to places on time. I was late, I was waiting. And so I called a hearing to find out what was happening. And then that's when we started calling it the summer meltdown. And I had the hearing in December. And what I found out was that we have a huge shortage of operators. We have spent all this money buying buses, millions and millions of dollars, but we haven't spent money on our operators. Did you know our operators make less than $46,500 a year? And that's how much you need to qualify for affordable housing. Our Muni drivers do not even qualify for affordable housing. How? And so they live so far away. They drive in, they sleep in their cars. It is outrageous. I mean, all we're doing is we're spending money training them. And then they go and get another job in Contra Costa, in Marin, making better money. So what do we have to do? And one of the things I made really clear in my hearing is that we have to pay Muni operators more money. At least enough money to qualify for affordable housing so they can live here. These operators, they see everything, all the worst of us in San Francisco. And then they get attacked, they have issues of trying to get on for buses, and we have to pay them. And so I kept the hearing open, and I said, we need these Muni drivers to make the money to at least qualify for affordable housing. Because as Ed Reskin said in the hearing, you need buses and you need drivers to make Muni work. And unless we have that, no amount of what we do, Muni's not going to work.
Ryan Sullivan, you have 1 minute to respond.
The inequality of not being able to live where you work is unfortunately common throughout the city, and bus drivers, Muni drivers, Muni workers are obviously a victim of that. And I cannot agree with Vallie more on that aspect, that we need more drivers. Our wait times are absurd. People will often avoid taking the bus and get a private car, Lyft or Uber, and causing more traffic throughout our entire city because they cannot wait. They have to get to work on time, they have to get their appointments on time, and the buses are not on time because we can't afford to pay our workers the right amount. I agree with Vallie 100% on that.
Dean, what is your response?
I think there's no better example than the failure of City Hall than public transportation right now in this city. We claim our official policies, we are a transit-first city. Feels to me for the last 7-8 years we've been an Uber-first city. And City Hall just sold out to these companies. I understand people use ride shares because it's cheaper at times, but the failure to regulate these companies, to put 50,000 of these, allow 50,000 unregulated cabs, basically, to be riding around the city. And it's not just about, I mean, the operator salaries are hugely important. Obviously, so are the buses. But what about uncongested streets? If you want Muni to function, you can't do it like we're currently doing it. I've been an everyday Muni rider for the last 25 years. I've never ordered an Uber or Lyft in my life. I'm out there campaigning every day at bus stops. If you see me, please say hi. And you know, we are not meeting our goals. 85% on time is the voter mandated goal, and we're at 55%, and that doesn't even count all the ones that are on time but too full to get on.
Ryan, we're going to start with you on this next question. There are major MTA projects that affect the district and are behind schedule or have been highly disruptive for residents and businesses. Recent examples in the district include the Geary BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, as well as Sunset Tunnel projects. What can the Board of Supervisors do now to reduce project delays and make residents' commutes go smoother?
I met up with the Department of Public Works the other week, and they are trying to assure us that they are actually getting done things as fast as possible. They are saying there's no other way that it could be done quicker, but that can't possibly be true if we have future planning. If we are going to look at projects that we need to have done in a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, we need to come up with plans on how to get that done before it actually comes time to enact it. The reason I might actually use the Van Ness project right now, is taking so long is because not every detail was planned out before the plan was proposed. So there's stops and stops and stops that are constantly happening, causing delays and all of these infrastructure changes. They're trying to better our city, and I do believe that they will better our public transit, but it's taking so long because we did not plan accordingly for it. We didn't plan Uber and Lyft to take control of our streets because of the lack of service that our own city provides. The reason why they are doing so well is because it is a far easier service for most citizens than it is to take public transit. So we need to look forward into what could possibly be happening and try to plan for those things rather than react to them.
So Ryan, what, in terms of planning, you've cited lack of planning as a problem in terms of some of these delays. What can the Board of Supervisors do? What would you do in your role if you were a supervisor to foster that planning?
I'd like to see how exactly the Van Ness project is going to turn out. I'm very excited for it. It's basically a segmented bus lane that's supposed to make it fast transit. If that in fact does work, then taking that to other streets before they start to become too congested.
So basically learn from the mistakes that have already happened. Dean, you have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. Well, to answer directly, I mean, the delays are obviously unacceptable. One thing that the board could do to address this in a bigger way is actually to have appointments to the MTA. I favor a split appointment instead of just mayoral appointments to the MTA, so that we have a different type of oversight that's worked on other commissions, and I think is long overdue at MTA. I would also propose, as part of, I mentioned the Green New Deal for San Francisco in my opening. One aspect of that is having basically like a Prop C for Muni, right? We need to tax the biggest corporations to generate funds to make major overhauls of Muni. I think people will support that, and I think we can bake into that the kind of oversight that we need to make sure that when those funds are spent, they're spent in a smart way, and we can avoid these kind of delays in the future.
Supervisor Brown, you have 1 minute.
Well, all these road construction projects are so painful, and I think they're really painful for the merchants. And that's the thing I really always worry about. And looking at ways that we can help merchants, whether that is giving them funds to help them pay their rent, to have moratoriums, like in Haight-Ashbury, have a moratorium for their part of their summer so they can make money. But it's frustrating because what happens is when they tear up the roads, all of a sudden they find things that weren't in the maps. And this is frustrating for everyone. I think what we need to do is looking at investing in better technology to see what's under our old roads before we tear them up. Because right now, when we start tearing up the roads, we have no idea what's there. We have, no matter how great the plan is, it always seems to go sideways. So we have to start looking at this with better technology as we start tearing up our roads.
Dean Preston, we're going to start with you on this next one. Just to highlight or sort of give an example of some of Muni's problems, this past February, Judah was on time 45% of the time, and late, or very late, 45% of the time. What would you do to make sure the Judah becomes more reliable?
First off, as I mentioned, the on-time statistics are the tip of the iceberg, because if you go to the Judah stops that I go to in District 5, you cannot get onto half of them, right? So it's actually far worse than those statistics would show you. I believe we need to fundamentally rethink transportation in this city. It's one of the most important issues, especially as we are growing and we need to plan to have robust Muni service. We need to be more ambitious. As someone, as I mentioned, who's been on Muni for the last 25 years, I grew up in New York City where you can get from point A to point B in 20 minutes. It's more efficient than being in a car. That's what we need to aspire to here. Really dramatically increasing our service in a way that we haven't in the past. But we also need to look at the things that are slowing us down, right? We talked about Uber and Lyft, but we have to talk about development. We can't just plan our city around making money for developers. So right now, many of you know about SB 50, for example, which promises to bring tens of thousands of new luxury condos to our city and to our district, with no plan to increase the requirements on developers to fund public transportation, right? So we have got to start talking about the impact of that development, of all the congestion, on the ability of Muni to be on time and the ability of us to have an actually functioning public transit system in this city. It's just not working to do this build it now, worry about it later approach, and that's what our planning department seems to be doing and City Hall seems to be embracing.
Supervisor Brown, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, once again, every day we're 400 drivers short. Every day. You wonder why Muni is late. Even when we bring out shuttles for the Judah, and I take the Judah all the time, it's still an issue and it's still late. So when we're talking about how can we fix Muni, it's number one, we have to have enough operators to drive the buses. And also with SB 50, I agree. I think that we should have transit, maybe not tied to that particular bill, but it needs to have a state transit bill. It's time. It's time for the state to have, we need to have a state transit bill. And I completely support that.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. Ryan, you have 1 minute to respond.
Speaking on the N line specifically, it would be fantastic if the Muni-only street car service was actually enforced. Cars are constantly blocking that roadway, so the bus is going to be the Muni is going to be constantly stuck behind them, which would cause further delays. And then it also will go back to what Vallie went on again, to make sure that all drivers that are scheduled for that line are actually able to be employed and be there for that line.
Thank you, Ryan. That ends our questions on the issue of transportation. We're going to move to our last topic of the evening regarding quality of life and public safety related issues, and we use that term broadly. First up has to do with the issue of empty storefronts. We're going to start with Dean. We continue to see empty storefronts in the upper and lower Haight along Fillmore and in Cole Valley. There's been some talk of the permitting process and recent legislation to raise penalties on property owners for leaving their buildings empty. But we also know that rents are simply unaffordable for many business models. what would you do to make sure landlords are not pricing out local businesses?
Thank you for the question. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, it's a huge issue in the district, and the vacant storefronts are not only a problem in themselves, but are a magnet for so many problems because you don't have eyes on the street and activity in front of them. What I see from City Hall right now is an attempt to move a lot of carrots and no sticks, right? So the vacancy tax is the stick. That's how you force the commercial landlord to rent. Part of why they're waiting for the exorbitant rent and keeping it empty is because they are waiting for the big chain store or the big corporation that can pay the astronomical ransom that they're holding their property at. So one of the things, by forcing them to pay a penalty through basically a vacancy tax if they don't rent it out, is that you force them to bring that rent down. Now, the same real estate industry, again, that's not supporting me in this race, but the same speculators, the same folks driving the crisis, the same folks who've made it impossible for us to have stronger rent control, also made it impossible for us to have commercial rent control. And that's the answer to your question. So until we take power away from those folks who are hell-bent on ensuring the maximum profit for every speculator out there, until we take their power away and change those rules, they will continue to gouge local businesses.
Supervisor Brown, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I mean, I have to say, with storefront vacancy controls, one of the big things that we've been working on at City Hall and myself is looking at different legislations, because I think you definitely have to have the sticks and the carrots. I really do. I mean, I don't know why some of these landlords don't rent out. I mean, a lot of them are in no retail formula. I mean, you can't have retail formula in a lot of these neighborhoods, and they're still not renting them out. So I'm not sure if that's the case. But one of the things that I have done is put in legislation to be able to take larger spaces and to have two businesses share, so they can share rent and all of the costs, to be able to do pop-ups. So many people want to be a small business, but they're not sure if they can do that. So giving them, taking away the restrictions and all the hoops that they have to jump through to get people to be able to go and rent those businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. Ryan, 1 minute for your response.
I'm in mainly agreement with Dean on this one. The rent is just too damn high. We should definitely instill a tax on people, in my opinion, if their business has been vacant for more than 6 months, meaning that it's been clear that they've been trying to actually occupy it, but it's been more than 6 months, then they need to be taxed on their square footage, I would say at market rate, just to force them to fill that business. Yeah, no, that's very aggressive, but it's becoming a problem more and more, and it's not being solved at all. It just keeps getting worse and worse. So an aggressive attack on this is going to be the best solution.
The next questions are going to deal a little bit more on the issues of crime and public safety. And we're going to start with Ryan Solomon on this one. As supervisor, you would represent the Upper Haight, which many neighbors report have rampant and consistent drug dealing on Haight Street in particular. Do you think that status quo is acceptable, and if not, what would you do to address it?
The status quo is unfortunately pretty accurate and totally not acceptable. I live at Haight Masonic, and I see this kind of action always happening around near Buena Vista Park, near the Panhandle, all around there, and it's become so common that it's ignored. It's ignored for several reasons besides my own perspective, but the punishment for drug use is to put people in jail, and we don't have a lot of jail space for all the people that are committing these crimes. I would recommend an alternative sentencing where they would be, instead of being put into jail for however many days, they would be put into rehabilitation for that same amount of days to try to get them off of whatever they're doing, or just get them to stop selling drugs or whatever it is illegal activity they're performing. To get this done, I would again push back to establishing a mental health care facility where people can be placed there rather than in jail. In jail, people that have drug addiction, it's not going to do any good for them whatsoever. They're just going to suffer in jail, then go back to the streets to do what they're doing it for. If they're given an option to try to help better themselves, then I believe that'll be a big push into help getting our streets safe and clean.
Thank you, Ryan. Dean, you have 1 minute for a response.
Well, as a parent living in the district, this is definitely a concern, and there's definitely a lot of street activity that's tough. But I think that in addressing it, I think we've got to recognize how much of our problem with criminal activity in the streets of all kinds is created by and compounded by the criminal justice system, the racist criminal justice system in our society. Right now, when folks are, the City Hall approach, the status quo approach is, more cops, arrest more people, fill the jails, longer sentences, right? Sound familiar? That's the approach, right? And what that does, you have 75% of the people who are booked into county jail are suffering from substance abuse problems or mental illness. They go into that system, they get none of the treatment they need, and then they get dumped back out into the community, and surprise, 2/3 of them reoffend and are back in the system to make matters worse again within 3 years. If we do not break that cycle, we will never make progress. I think we can break that cycle, and that needs to be the priority.
Supervisor Brown, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I have a lot of experience with this because of my work in the Western Addition when we were having a lot of the violence, and it was something I think anybody that was an activist in this district would have been or should have been involved in. But one of the things that we realized, it wasn't hiring more cops, putting more cops out there. It was trying to get beat patrol. Because when the police know the community, it makes it safer. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we had police go up to kids that had guns, and they were able to talk them out of the guns, get the guns away from them. If those cops didn't know the kids, those kids could have been shot. And so what we did is we actually had the community come together and help make decisions of how to have this move forward. It wasn't putting funds into the police, it was putting funds into community programs to give those people opportunities, whether it's opportunities to get off drugs, opportunities to get jobs, education. Those are the things we need to do. That's how we should be funding.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. So this last question in this topic has to do with gun violence, and more specifically, having to do with what happened in front of the Fillmore Heritage Center. On March 23rd of this year, there was a tragic shooting outside of the Heritage Center that injured 4 and killed 1. As a response to the shooting, the city has not yet renewed the lease that would allow the Heritage Center to operate there. Supervisor Brown, we're gonna start with you on this one. It sounds like from some reporting from the Chronicle that the city would have probably already renewed the lease if the shooting hadn't occurred at that location. Questions have been raised about whether the Heritage Center was able to provide sufficient security. But is it the responsibility of leaseholders, like the ones that were at that location, or the city, or both, to provide for public safety and protection against gun violence? And either way, will you work to ensure the Fillmore Heritage Center will be able to operate once again?
Yes. So I was the biggest promoter and push for the community to be able to use the center. I looked at it as a community hub, and I still look at it that way. The unfortunate incident that happened, one person was killed, and one person actually is paralyzed. It is not, this is a serious situation. And so we had given them a 6-month lease to find out, how it's working. And actually, they had April, to reboot it. So what I did is after the incident, it was closing anyway for a month while they rebooted it. And what I did is I said, look, we have got to figure out what happened, how it happened, and let's change it. I still feel, and I know the new leadership group, I still believe in them. I still think that they are the group to be able to work with this community. If any of you went to any of the cultural events there, they were amazing. I put funding in to help them run this center. I actually also put San Francisco Housing Development Corporation in so people could come in and get housing services and sign up for affordable housing. I actually now are pushing for Open Door Legal to go there so they can help tenants if they have problems with their landlords or help people do land estate planning. So I feel it is a community hub and I still am dedicated to it. Do we need safety measures? Do we need to relook at the safety procedures? Absolutely. But I still believe that this is a center that could actually be the breath and heart of the Fillmore.
Yes! Thank you, Supervisor Brown. Ryan Solomon, what is your response?
With your initial question, you're asking, is it the police responsibility or the community responsibility?
And then also, so yes, and then also, will you work to ensure that the center will be able to open again?
So I believe that it is both parties' responsibility. We only work as a whole society. We can't work individually. This person can't be against this person. We won't work, if we don't work together, we just won't work. A lot of people are not comfortable around police because of actions that they have committed throughout the country and our own city. We need to work with our police department to better train them to handle situations, to de-escalate situations, as Vallie pointed out earlier. So if we can train them to not attack, to not aggress a situation, to degress it, then I think that would be the first step. But as for reopening, yes, I heavily support reopening any community organization, as shutting it down is not going to benefit society at all.
Thank you, Ryan. And Dean Preston, 1 minute for your response as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's absolutely essential that we reopen and reactivate Fillmore Heritage Center. And for folks, you know, there was so much hope and optimism at the time with the launch of the Heritage Center of Yoshi's. You know, there was years where there was a feeling of some more economic opportunity in the neighborhood, and that's really shifted, and we've got to address it. I think, you know, I have a perspective as a former small business owner around whose responsibility it is. I was a co-owner of Cafe du Nord, which is a venue, and when you run a venue, there's always issues around keeping the place safe. It is absolutely the responsibility of both the leaseholder and the city, and you cannot pin it on just one. Both have. You've got to make sure that folks running a venue take all the steps necessary to prevent this kind of violence. So I look forward to meeting with anyone interested in operating any of the spaces at Fillmore Heritage Center and getting that reactivated as soon as possible.
Thank you, Dean. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for the question and answer portion of the debate. So I want to take the time to thank the candidates for their responses to these questions. We are now going to move on to the closing statements portion. Each of the candidates will have 2 minutes for their closing statement. Supervisor Brown, we will begin with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming out today. I think that our values in San Francisco, our progressive values, are so important. And it's something that we have to work to keep them as they are and make them better. I think housing, homeless, and the environment is something that we really should work on. I started as an environmental activist, and the Green New Deal, we've been doing things at Clean Power, other things at City Hall to actually push that forward. I can't tell you how I feel about this community. And the thing with me is I work and I'm collaborative. Whether we disagree or not, I'm going to be there listening to you. I have passed 14 pieces of legislation since I've been in 8 months, and all unanimously. That's because I'm able to work with everyone on the board, and then I'm also able to get funding for it, because that's what we need. We need people in City Hall that have that perspective that can push forward. Do we need to do more? Do we need to do more on housing, on homelessness? Absolutely. Absolutely we need to. And I feel like I'm there for everyone, but I'm not going to do anything without going out to the community and talking to them, because that's who I am. I'm a community activist first, and then supervisor second. And I appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and thank you, and we'll see you at the next debate.
Thank you, Supervisor Brown. Dean Preston, please give your closing statement.
Well, thank you all for being here this evening, regardless of who you are supporting. I appreciate your time. On my way over here this evening, I walked by the mural at Ella Hill Hutch, just a block away, looked up at the image of Dr. Zaretti Gooseby. He was the first African-American president of the school board here in San Francisco. He's also my kid's great-grandfather. And it got me really thinking about my kids in the city, what kind of city they and their classmates are growing up in, whether they're going to be able to, whether all these folks are going to be able to stay here, whether their teachers are going to be able to stay here, what it's going to look like if they have kids, and are we going to retain any of what we know and love about this city. I have been on the front lines fighting for residents of this district and of this city. The key issue is the affordability of this city. That has been my fight for the last 20 years. It is a fight I will continue waging. I was there when Iris Canada was being evicted from her home, a 100-year-old African-American woman on Page Street being evicted, and I will be there every time our neighbors are under attack. I think we need a supervisor who is 100% independent of the real estate speculators that are causing all the misery in this city. And that is why I'm backed by the San Francisco Tenants Union. I'm their sole endorsement. That is why I am not backed by the San Francisco Apartment Association, who, surprise, has endorsed someone else on this panel. Now, it's also why I oppose SB 50. Firmly. Because it's going to take away our neighbors' voices, fuel displacement and gentrification. It is also why I have the endorsements of so many community leaders who side with the community again and again, like Tom Amiano here in the front row, Mark Leno, James Kim, Art Agnos, and supervisors Ronan, Peskin, Mandelman, Marr, and Haney, and so many others. But in the end, the endorsement that matters is your endorsement. And I really hope I can count on your support in November. Thank you so much.
Dean, thank you so much for your closing statement. And our last closing statement will be Ryan Solomon.
I can bet you I'm not going to manage claps for that. But I'm all new to the scene, as you all can well tell. I have very strong opinions on what I think our city needs help with, and I would like to think that I'm the voice for the majority of people in District 5, the working class and the renting class. I go through all the same struggles and have the same difficulties that every working day people do, and I was forced in this situation, or not forced in this situation, I was forced to run basically the situation that I was put into with the attack that I told you happened at the beginning. I feel like nothing has been done to address the mental health care that we have an issue with in our city, and that is going to be my massive push. If you really think that we need mental health care for everyone in our city, not just people who are living on the streets, but everyday citizens, then I would enjoy your support. If I were able to win the position, I would also hold monthly town hall meetings, guaranteed, so I can hear the opinions of what the citizens think is going on with the issues. If you want to support me, I'd greatly appreciate it. If not, we two have great candidates as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the candidates. Oh yes, and yeah, thank you again to the candidates. Thank you to the audience for your attention and mostly respecting the rules. And thank you to the African American Art and Culture Complex. Thanks to those of you who are at home watching remotely for the District 5 debate, brought to you by the Alice Toklas LGBT Democratic Club. Have a nice evening, everyone.